Hello, hello, you minions. How are you doing this morning? Can you all see me? Because I can't see a damn thing out of this mask. All right, that was my Gru impression. How many people have seen Despicable Me? Or, yeah, where are you? Actually, kind of look like minions from up here. Some of you may have your hats. Let's give a warm round of applause for Tim Draper. We're gonna have a little fireside chat.
Great to be here, 500 strong.
Tim, you're wearing a mask. Are you about to rob someone?
No, this is the great honor that is bestowed on people who have graduated from Draper University of Heroes.
I see.
And
Are you a superhero?
No, I aspire to one day graduate from Draper University of Heroes. I have graduated people, but I have never actually been one of the heroes coming off the line.
I'd like to ask you a few questions about your illustrious history in venture capital, if you don't mind. For those who don't know, Tim was the founding managing partner at Draper Fisher Jurvetson. He also started his own fund, Draper Associates, and these days runs Draper University. I'm sure there's a bunch of other things that I'm forgetting there, but maybe if you could tell us.
Well, that's probably enough. I'm going to take this back so I can see.
I thought
Turns
the
out
eyebrows.
superheroes are a little partially blinded by their masks.
I thought the eyebrows were actually part of your costume, but I guess not.
Part of the brand.
I know, actually, they are. They're very distinguishable. So
You've
maybe
got
if you
'em
could tell
too.
us.
He's got them too.
I do have
think
some
it
weird
goes with
eyebrows.
the territory.
You guys, yeah, that's good genes, I guess. What was it like getting DFJ off the ground, and when did that actually happen? I think late 80s or mid 80s?
Well, actually, it was Draper Associates when it got started,
okay.
and that was in '85.
Right.
And I took over an SBIC that my dad had started, and he figured, what the heck? It was a bunch of sort of cats and dogs, and the SBIC was still valuing them at $2 million. So I borrowed $6 million from the government. Thank you all for your taxes.
Most people don't know that venture capital is actually an entitlement program.
And I borrowed that $6 million, and that's how I built my record. And I was on their watch list. We got feedback. I'll back away. I was on their watch list because after about 3 years, it looked like I had lost the entire thing, and they said, "You're on our watch list," and I said, "Okay, what does that mean?" "Well, nothing, but we're just watching you." And I said, "Okay," and then they said, "Now you're on our dirt list," and I said, "Oh God, I'm in my dirt list. What does that mean?" "Well, we're calling the loan." I said, no, you can't do that. And I flew back to Washington, and I said, please hang in there just a little longer. I think some good things are about to happen here. I didn't know. And they went ahead with it.
You came back to California, kicked a bunch of entrepreneurs' asses, and
well,
hopefully some things worked.
What happened was the IPO window opened up in 1991, and I suddenly had 6 IPOs, and the biggest one was Parametric Technology, and it got to be a unicorn. It was huge. And I went back to the SBIC program just to sort of check in, keeping good relations. And I went from their dirt list to being the venture capitalist of the year. And they had my picture up there with Entrepreneur of the Year, or Venture Capitalist of the Year, and that was, where as an entrepreneur, your fortunes will disappear, and then they'll come back big, and they'll disappear, and they'll come back big. Just, live the journey.
So I guess, for those who don't know, SBIC is a small
then
business.
I brought on partners, 6. You asked about DFJ. I brought on John Fisher, who I had worked with at Alex Brown for a year. Great guy. He was a perfect partner for me. He was sort of my yin to his yang. And then Steve, then we started when we would disagree on something, we would just butt heads. And that didn't work, and it was nice to find Steve Jurvetson, who ended up being the tiebreaker, and also a super bright guy who really kind of brought us into some very interesting places. So yeah, that was the beginning, and from there it was just great until it wasn't, and then it was bad, and then it was great again. And we were lucky. We did some international investing in 1999 when the U.S. was about to go through its
you're sort of famous for doing a lot of international investing quite early. Both you and your dad were, more looking outside the U.S. earlier than I think almost anybody else in the industry. Why did you guys decide that international was interesting?
Well, it helped me because my dad was the head of the UN development program for a while.
That might help.
And I took a few trips with him, and I went to China. It was about 30 years ago. And I went to China, and I landed there. We drove in the only car on the only paved road to the only international hotel called the Friendship Hotel.
Must have been in the 80s then, or?
It was late 80s, and boy, have things changed. Everybody was on bicycles. Everything was just dirt, and people would sell things to each other, or not sell, trade things with each other in these Chinese hats. And that was kind of the way it was operating. And I always kind of kept my eye thinking, boy, there may be something that happens here. Because I really liked all the Chinese people I met. That was a big opportunity. Because there's so many.
There's a lot of them, yes, I agree. You started something called the DFJ Network, which was kind of, I guess, maybe a network model for VC or a franchise model for VC. Why did you decide to do that, and kind of what were some of the lessons learned from doing that effort?
Well, it was interesting. I partly fell into it before, as I said, the SBIC thing was not going well, and I was out of money. And I was not only out of money, but I had already, it looked like I was also $6 million in debt. And I saw this flyer that everybody who was a venture capitalist at the time got, which was, come to Alaska and show us how venture capital works. And so I thought, well, kind of a fun boondoggle. And
Alaska, a hotbed of startup activity.
Right, I went up there, and about 2 years later, we set up a fund. And I said, well, I'll do this for you, but why don't we say half the money goes in Alaska and half the money goes in the Silicon Valley? And they said, okay, that's fine. And I had an Alaskan partner who's wonderful. We pretty much, there was one company in Alaska that kind of made us our money back, but the rest was a total bust. But we did really well for that fund because I got them into a couple of companies that both got sold to AOL, and AOL went. So they ended up making out really well in that fund. So I thought, hey, you can actually do this remotely. And so then, but I didn't think Alaska was the best hotspot because the population isn't very great there. So we started to set these up all over the US, and then we got approached by two people who wanted to go international with us, and it was a little like you were setting up today. It would be like, okay, we're going to set up a franchise on Mars. It was that remote. Like, really, you're going to set up venture capital in, outside of the U.S.? It's weird enough that if it were outside Silicon Valley and Route 128, but the idea was to go everywhere.
And you guys were kind of everywhere. You were in, I think, Ukraine, and you were in China and India.
Yeah. Ukraine, I lost all my money in Ukraine. And this is the only true thief that I've ever backed, was in Ukraine. So I probably won't be investing there much again. But China was fantastic.
You found a couple of.
It was fantastic. Our first few investments there were in people who said they had good government connections. But then after that, we lost all our money in those. But but then
Tim, you seem to have a good track record on losing money. Did you
I-
ever
I
make
have.
any money at this?
there were a few.
this business?
So then I backed. I thought, well, maybe we're doing this wrong. Why don't we just do it the way we do it in the Silicon Valley? I mean, maybe we'll find some just very driven entrepreneurs who really want to make a big difference in the world. And then we started backing them. And all of a sudden we had Kongjong and Baidu and Focus Media and all of these huge winners that came out of China because we actually plowed the turf there. We were the first ones in.
And Baidu's obviously become a huge company now, probably over 50 billion in value. You also found Skype out of Europe, right?
Yeah, so going international really paid off for us in a time when other venture capitalists were completely almost shutting down. And so Skype was, there's a fun Skype story if you want to tolerate me.
Sure.
Skype was about, I backed Skype when it was just two guys and they hadn't really figured out what they were going to do. In fact, they changed it just after I committed and just before they took the money and they told me that they were going to do it. But I said, they were up to about 3 million users and it was all audio and about 100,000 simultaneous users. And I had to be at a conference speaking with Tony Perkins. At the same time, I had to be at a Skype board meeting in Estonia. So Palo Alto, Estonia. And I said, can you do video conference in Estonia? And Nicholas goes, oh yeah, no problem. I said, really? Because video conference was like this back then. And it was very difficult to see or anything. And then I went to Tony and I said, hey, do you mind doing it by video conference? And he said, yeah, but will you interview that guy, Nicholas Zenstrom, over this and we'll do it that way? And I said, perfect. So I get there and we're set up like this and Nicholas looks over my shoulder and he goes, okay, throw the switch. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, oh, don't worry about it. And we had our video conference. And I said, how did it go, Tony? And he said, oh my God, we could see the pores on your skin. It was fantastic. Everything worked. Audio was perfect. And I turned to Nicholas and he's chuckling. And I said, what? And he said, that was the first Skype video ever. And I said, you used something in the lab for this? And he goes, yeah. And I said, oh my gosh, well, we've got a winner here. And he goes, not so fast, Tim. We cut off 100,000 simultaneous phone calls in order to get the bandwidth to do the video. So you entrepreneurs will do whatever it takes. I know that.
Well, speaking of sort of some big wins, I guess, how do you find great founders? Do you think you know great founders when you see them? What's kind of your selection criteria?
Clearly, it's trial and error.
Obviously.
But here's what I look for. Okay, there was something amongst all three of those big winners: Baidu, Skype, and Hotmail.
Hotmail was the other big win you had.
Hotmail was the other big winner, and then Tesla also. And weirdly, all four of those people, when they pitched me, they all used the word delight when they talked about their customer. I want to delight my customer. And having that as your attitude, I think makes all the difference. I mean, I think if you, now of course you're going to come pitch me and go, hey, I want to delight my customer.
Little insight into Tim's selection process.
But if they really have a good customer bias, that's the difference between sort of unicorn and rhino. It's that kick that they really want to make it so beautiful for their customer. They want to just sort of delight them.
Sorry, you said the word rhino. I'm guessing that's an ugly unicorn, or what's the story?
It's bigger and fatter. It still has one horn.
Okay. Maybe, I know I started following you and DFJ when I came out to California, like 1989 or so. Maybe mid-90s, I guess, was really when you guys were quite visible on the scene. How do you think about brand and marketing for yourself? And, how did you kind of get DFJ to be a household name in the Valley?
I should ask you this question. Dave is the master of marketing.
Well, we get him a little bit of costume.
But here's something really weird. I was the first venture capitalist to advertise, and I was the second venture capitalist to go and work with a press.
So first venture capitalist advertised. You took out a Yellow Pages ad, or
no? I advertised in Upside magazine because we had
okay.
an investment in Upside magazine.
Got it.
And I was the first one, and they all kind of looked at me like, "Oh God, how weird!" And it started to work. I was getting amazing deal flow from it, and I thought, "Whoa!" And then the press was—they were always like, I mean, at first, when you deal with the press, they'll write one good story about you. And then the next story will be just like, ja, ja, and I remember
I've had a few of those.
I remember my partner Fisher looking at me like, "What are you doing? Why are you dealing with these people? How can you do this?" And I said, "Okay, it's okay." And then it gets to this sort of thing where you know that there's a balance, and you get a little bit of lift up, and then ja again, and if you get used to that, you get sort of a feel for it. Overall, it can be a great marketing strategy. And then,
so no such thing as bad press?
Well, I'm not sure. But our network, all these things we did were sort of extraordinary, and so the press was kind of loving it because there were always these interesting, great entrepreneurs, always something to write about. We did the first network. We were the first ones to go to China. We were the first ones to, I mean, so many firsts that the press was kind of going, "Okay, what are you going to do next? What are you going to do next?" And then they'd write the good piece, and then they go, "Yeah."
So I guess the lesson learned is, ride that press up and ride the press down, and it's still
keep coming back. And if there's any factual thing, this is something Elizabeth
Any
Holmes,
factual thing, all the rest of the stuff that's not factual is okay.
No. If there's any factual thing that you need to correct in the press, go correct it, nail it, make it even if it ends up on page 335 when the bad news was on page 1, because what happens is the press goes back to that and says, "Oh well, this must be the case, whatever it is." So you have to correct it. Here's where Elizabeth Holmes probably did it wrong and Elon Musk did it right. Elon, I'll give you the two examples. And this will,
Elizabeth
if you
Holmes,
become a
founder
rhino.
of Theranos.
What's that?
Elizabeth Holmes was the founder of Theranos. They got a little press in the last year or so.
Yeah, and Elon got a lot of bad press too. Here's what happens. You build something that really is extraordinary. You affect a lot of people. There are people's livelihoods that are at stake. They can be ruined by you. But you're changing the world for the better. The consumer improves. Everything's better, except for those few people that have the jobs that you've just displaced. So the car companies didn't like when Elon came up with a car that was way better than anything they had. And so they somehow got the New York Times to write this article about how the battery didn't last that long, really. And Elon thought, God, how could they not have made it from Washington to someplace in Virginia on a tank of electricity? And he said, something must be wrong here. And he said, well, we do tag all the cars, so let's see what happened with that car. And so he watches, and the press writer, goes around for 3 hours, drives around for 3 hours in a parking lot in order to run out of juice. And so Elon goes, "Hey, you're busted. I caught you." And then every time the press came up with another thing about how something went bad with a Tesla, the next day Elon came back with, and not only is this wrong, but the Tesla is better for the environment, and it's faster and better around corners, and it's more automated, and anything that goes wrong, we can change it by Wi-Fi. So he kept coming back and fought. Elizabeth was attacked so broadly and badly, and there was one writer who just decided that was going to be his thing, and he was getting fed information from their competition. She froze up and never responded. And by never responding, everyone assumed the worst. And by assuming the worst, then the government had to get involved. And of course, if the FDA comes into your office, they're going to find something. They're going to go, hey, no, I'm sorry, this is not to regulation, and I don't think you should be having that when you're, testing blood and whatever else it was. So I think beware that you need to fight back. That's what's great about the blogosphere, and you know how to handle that. You can fight back.
I've had an incident called Bin 38 in the past that was sort of my interesting association with the press. But it sounds like, engaging with the press, even if the stories aren't positive, probably gives you the opportunity to tell your side of the story, or at least try and get your side of the story.
And you can actually, like Elon created a great marketing system there where he got attacked and then he came back. And then everybody knew about what a Tesla was, and he never advertised.
So I guess you've seen a lot of the venture capital industry over the last 30 years or so. What do you think is maybe different or same over the years? I guess a lot of people are maybe saying we're in a bubble right now. Do you think we're in a bubble, and does it look like it did in the late 90s, or is it different?
So when I got started, no one knew what a venture capitalist was. And so I went around and I'd knock on doors of anything that looked like a new construction thing that said something software. And that was the beginning. That was a long time ago. And then 1999 was the bubble, the great boom, and then the bust. And the things that are the same now are that the traffic is up. If there's a lot of traffic, then you beware a little bit. But the thing that's different is that there's no frenzy of activity around the public market, because by the time some company gets public now, it's a boring company, because it used to be if there were 50 million in market cap, we could take them public. And that was an exciting thing. And then the public would bid them up, and we were thinking, wow, it was 50 yesterday, and it's 500 next week, and it's worth $1 billion today, and wow, this is really working well. We didn't know what we were into, but it was exciting. Today, there isn't that public market, because all the regulations on public companies are so bad that it costs you $5 million a year to just stay public. So you have to be huge. You have to be worth billions before you can even go public. So nobody's really like crazy day trading around the new public offerings, and nobody's really writing much about them, because they're already there. They're already past that exciting time. And I think
more stable companies kind of by the time they go public.
Yeah, and I think we need sort of a private market. We talked about it a little bit before. I think we need sort of a private market that allows people to get that excitement around these companies that are between 50 million and 5 billion in market cap. So something ought to happen there.
So we're kind of wrapping up here, but maybe one last question for you about kind of what's coming next and what are you excited about. You have 3 kids who are all somewhat involved in venture capital, Adam, Billy, and Jesse. What do you think the next generation of VC holds for us?
Yeah, we ought to ask them. Yeah, it's great. Adam runs Boost, which is an accelerator he started with Bitcoin and the blockchain, and then he did VR and AR. And he's doing he's taking things where a group of people will come together and create an industry. And that's kind of exciting. It's really fun. Jessie runs Halogen Ventures, and she only backs women. So, that eliminates like 80% of this audience.
Well, I hope not. I hope we have more women than just 20%. We'll see.
Well, maybe it's hard to see in the lights. And then Billy joined me at Draper Associates, and we back early stage ventures all over the world, and it's fun. And then Eleanor is working for a startup in New York, so we've got 4 of them all kind of in this sort of frenzy of activity that we've all kind of gotten to know and love.
Well, Tim, you've always been an inspiration to me, and I know that we always find you're still enthusiastic about it. Even your dad is still involved in the industry.
He's 88, and he is just amazing. He still gets the highest rating, maybe other than you, as a speaker at Draper University. And he walks in there. He looks great. He feels great. He's pretty awesome.
Well, thanks again for spending some time with us this morning, this afternoon, and I hope you keep coming back and keep investing in our startups.
Terrific. Well, of course. And I'm Tim. Wait. No. Here's what I'm going to give you. mail@draper.vc if you want to submit a plan, or if you just want to talk, or whatever. Anyway, mail@draper.vc.
All right.
Really great. And I love what David does. Isn't he amazing? He's amazing. Look at this. It's amazing.
Thanks again for coming out, Tim.
All right, you bet.
All right.